This presentation explores ancient myths that contain themes of violence and destruction. Viewer discretion is advised. Humanity was almost erased from existence. Not by a flood, not by an asteroid, but by a single divine being who waded through fields of the dead, drunk on the blood of her victims. She was a weapon forged by the sun itself, a plague given form, and her only purpose was to annihilate mankind for their arrogance. She was so terrifying, so unstoppable, that the very gods who created her soon realized they had made a fatal mistake. They had built a weapon they could not control. They had unleashed the end of the world. And yet, for thousands of years, the people of ancient Egypt would pray to this same exact goddess for healing. They would beg her to cure their diseases, protect their children, and ward off the very plague she was known to command. How? How does a creature of pure, unadulterated slaughter, a lion-headed goddess of vengeance, become one of the most revered protectors and physicians in the ancient world? The answer to that question reveals a terrifying truth about the nature of power, the balance between creation and destruction, and the desperate bargains our ancestors made with the forces that govern their universe. To understand the monster, we have to understand the world that birthed her. Imagine ancient Egypt. Not the Egypt of postcards and museum exhibits, but the Egypt of raw elemental power. A sliver of impossible green life, the Nile Valley, surrounded by an ocean of red-hot, lifeless desert. Life and death weren't abstract concepts, they were the view from your front door. The sun wasn't just a star in the sky. It was the god Ra, the creator of all things, who sailed his celestial boat across the heavens by day and battled the serpent of chaos, Apep, in the underworld by night. Every single day, the fate of the universe hung in the balance. This cosmic struggle was governed by a single crucial principle, Ma'at, the concept of order, of truth, of justice and divine balance. If Ma'at was upheld, the Nile would flood and nourish the land, the sun would rise and civilization would prosper. But if Ma'at was disturbed, chaos would seep in at the edges of reality, and everything would unravel. And one day, humanity decided to unravel it. The myths tell us that Ra had grown old. He had ruled for eons, and his divine power, once absolute, now showed the faintest signs of wear. His bones were like silver, his flesh like gold, and his hair the color of lapis lazuli. He was still a god, but he was an old god. And humanity, his own creation, began to notice. They saw a king on a fading throne. Whispers started in the marketplaces of Thebes and the ports of Memphis. Conspiracies were hatched in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. Mankind began to plot against their creator. They mocked his age, questioned his authority, and planned to overthrow the very God who had given them life. This was more than just treason. It was a fundamental violation of Ma'at. It was a crack in the foundation of the cosmos. The chaos serpent Apep, defeated each night by Ra, now had an opening. The whispers of men were an echo of the serpent's own hiss. Ra heard them. His all-seeing eye, which was the sun itself, saw the plots forming in the hearts of men. He knew that this rebellion, if left unchecked, would not just end his reign. It would shatter the divine order and plunge the world into an eternal darkness. He called a council of the most ancient and powerful gods, meeting in secret in the primordial waters from which all life had sprung. He gathered Nun, the father of the gods, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. He asked them for their counsel. "My own children," he said, his voice echoing with the weight of millennia. "The men and women I created with my own hands now conspire against me. Tell me, what should I do?" The gods were silent, contemplating the gravity of the situation. It was Nun, the eldest of them all, who spoke first. He told Ra that his power was still immense, that his throne was secure, but that the insolence of humanity could not be ignored. They had forgotten fear. They needed to be reminded of their place in the cosmic order. They needed to be reminded of who their creator was. And the way to do that was to turn Ra's own power, his own divine essence, into an instrument of retribution. The plan was simple, and it was horrifying. Ra would unleash his eye. The eye of Ra was not a physical object, but a manifestation of his power, a feminine entity of immense force, often personified by a goddess. In this case, the gentle, loving goddess Hathor, patron of music, dance, and joy, was chosen. But she would not be sent as a benevolent protector. Ra would channel all of his fury, all of his rage at humanity's betrayal, into her. He would transform her. And so, in a moment of divine and terrible alchemy, The goddess of love was twisted into a being of pure rage. Her form shifted. Her soft features hardened into the snarling visage of a lioness. Her hands, once graceful, grew claws capable of tearing stone. Her gentle voice became a roar that could shake the mountains. She was no longer Hathor. She was reborn as Sekhmet. The name itself meant the powerful one, but it would soon become a synonym for terror. Ra gave her a single command: go down into the world of mortals and execute my judgment. Remind them of the price for disturbing Ma'at. Sekhmet descended from the heavens like a falling star, a streak of fire against the blue Egyptian sky. She landed not in a palace or a temple, but in the midst of the desert where the conspirators were gathering. For a moment there was silence. The plotters looked up, shielding their eyes from the radiant, terrifying figure before them. They saw the head of a lioness, the body of a woman, and the burning disk of the sun blazing above her head. They saw the cobra of divine authority, the uraeus coiled on her brow, ready to spit fire. They saw the living embodiment of the sun's wrath. And then the slaughter began. She moved faster than any mortal could track. Her first kill was not with a weapon, but with her bare hands. The conspirators, who had moments before been boasting of their plans to overthrow a god, were now nothing more than prey. Their screams were cut short by the crunch of bone and the tearing of flesh. Sekhmet didn't just kill them. She reveled in it. She was a force of nature unleashed, a hurricane of claws and teeth. The desert sands, once golden, were stained a deep dark red. And as the blood of her first victims flowed, she bent down and she drank. The taste of it, the life force of her father's enemies, filled her with an ecstatic, insatiable rage. This was not a calculated punishment. It was a massacre. And it was only the beginning. Her hunt had just begun, and her thirst for blood would not be satisfied with a few traders in the desert. She now looked toward the cities, toward the teeming millions living along the Nile, and saw nothing but more fuel for her divine fire. The fire spread from the sands to the cities, a wave of divine retribution that no wall could stop and no army could slow. The first to fall was a city near the delta, a bustling hub of commerce and life. One moment, its people were bartering in the markets, children playing by the riverbanks, priests chanting in the cool shade of the temples. The next, the horizon turned crimson. A roar, deeper and more terrifying than any earthly lion, shook the very foundations of their world. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force, a vibration that rattled the teeth and turned the blood to ice. Sekhmet arrived not as a warrior, but as a natural disaster. She was a walking sandstorm, a living inferno. Her mane of fire seemed to scorch the sky itself, and the sun, her own father, appeared to dim in her presence. Panic was a luxury the people didn't have time for. Her claws, each the size of a farmer's scythe, tore through mud brick homes as if they were papyrus. Stone temples, built to last for eternity, crumbled under her rage. She didn't distinguish between the guilty and the innocent, the conspirator and the bystander. To her enraged mind, they were all part of the same festering wound on the face of creation, the same insult to her father's majesty. The rebellion had been a symptom, humanity was the disease, and she was the cure. She waded through the streets, a maelstrom of destruction, her powerful legs kicking aside rubble and bodies with equal indifference. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, began to run red, not with ochre from the mountains, but with the blood of its people. She drank deeply from the carnage, and with every life she ended, her power grew, her rage intensified. This was the horrifying paradox of the Eye of Ra. Her purpose was to restore divine order, but the act of fulfilling it was pure, unadulterated chaos. She was a weapon that grew sharper and more deadly with every use, a fire that fed on the very thing it was meant to purify. Up in the heavens, the other gods watched in stunned silence. This was not what they had envisioned. A lesson, yes. A show of force, absolutely. But this was an extermination. Osiris, lord of the underworld, watched as the souls of the dead flooded his domain in a torrent so overwhelming his scribes couldn't possibly keep count. Thoth, the god of wisdom, saw millennia of knowledge, libraries, scrolls, the accumulated wisdom of a civilization, being turned to ash and dust. Isis, the great mother, wept for the families being torn apart, for the children whose futures were being devoured by the lioness. But it was Ra who felt the deepest horror. He had unleashed this. In a moment of wounded pride and righteous fury, he had pulled the pin on a cosmic grenade and thrown it at his own creation. He had wanted to remind humanity of his power, to make them fear him again. But the creature below was no longer just his daughter, no longer just his eye. She was an independent force, a self-sustaining engine of destruction. The divine rage he had poured into her had taken root and grown into something monstrous, something that now answered to nothing but its own thirst. He called to her, his voice booming across the heavens, a command that could split mountains and calm seas. He ordered her to stop, but his words were lost in the symphony of her slaughter. She couldn't hear him, or perhaps she simply wouldn't. The connection between them, the leash of a creator to his creation, had been severed by the sheer volume of blood she had spilled. She was drunk on it, intoxicated by her own power. The gods convened in a panic. This couldn't continue. If Sekhmet was not stopped, there would be no humanity left to rule over. Egypt would become a barren, blood-soaked wasteland, a silent monument to a god's terrible miscalculation. They debated frantically. Should they fight her? The idea was dismissed almost as soon as it was spoken. Who could stand against the Eye of Ra in its purest, most violent form? She was the embodiment of the sun's destructive power. To fight her would be like trying to fight the sun itself. They would all be incinerated. They needed a plan. Not a plan of force, but a plan of deception. They turned to Thoth, the cleverest of the gods, the master of words and magic, the divine strategist. His ibis head was bowed in thought, his mind racing through every possibility, every piece of ancient lore, every psychological weakness he could imagine. And then he looked up, his eyes gleaming with a desperate, brilliant idea. He spoke of her nature. She was not just a killer, she was a predator, a lioness. She was driven by the sight and scent of blood. Her rage was a fire, but her thirst was the fuel. If they couldn't extinguish the fire, perhaps they could trick her into drinking something that would. He proposed a plan of magnificent scale, a ruse so grand it would require the cooperation of every surviving human and every god in the pantheon. The plan was simple in concept but staggering in its execution. They would brew a sea of beer, the favorite drink of both mortals and gods in Egypt. But it wouldn't be just any beer. They would dye it red. They would make it look, feel, and even smell like a vast lake of human blood. The hope was that Sekhmet, in her bloodlust, would be drawn to this seemingly endless offering. She would drink and keep drinking, until the intoxicating effects of the alcohol pacified her, quenching her rage in a way that violence never could. The order went out. From the heavens, the gods commanded the priests. The priests commanded the people. All across the surviving parts of Egypt, a frantic, desperate effort began. Every brewer, every farmer, every person capable of carrying a jug was put to work. They harvested barley from the fields at a speed born of terror. The great breweries of the temples, normally used for sacred rites, were fired up to work day and night, their fires lighting up the sky. They weren't brewing for a festival. They were brewing for their very survival. The gods themselves aided the effort. Nepri, the god of grain, ensured a miraculous harvest. Tenenet, the goddess of beer, oversaw the brewing, ensuring a potency far beyond any mortal drink. The scale of the operation was almost unimaginable. They brewed 7,000 massive jars of beer, an amount so vast it would have taken years under normal circumstances. As the final batches were finished, Ra commanded that they bring him red ochre from the island of Elephantine, a sacred place deep in the south of Egypt. The mineral was ground into a fine powder, its deep crimson color a perfect imitation of lifeblood. Under the cover of night, as Sekhmet was laying waste to another city to the north, the gods and the people worked together. They poured the 7,000 jars of beer across a huge plain near the city of Dendra. Then they mixed in the red ochre, stirring the vast, shallow lake until it took on the dark, glistening sheen of a battlefield's aftermath. The air became thick with the coppery scent of the ochre and the sweet, malty aroma of the beer, a bizarre cocktail of salvation. As the sun began to rise, the work was done. A field that had been dry and dusty the day before was now a shimmering blood-red lake. The gods retreated to the heavens to watch, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Everything depended on this. If she saw through the ruse, or if her rage was simply too great to be subdued by drink, then all was lost. From the north, a crimson dot appeared in the sky, growing larger and more terrifying with each passing second. It was Sekhmet, her rampage complete for the night, her body caked in the evidence of her work. She flew toward the south, seeking new cities, new victims. And then she saw it. Below her, stretching for miles, was a sight that made even her pause. It was a lake of blood, bigger than any she could have ever created on her own. It was a tribute, a reward, a glorious reflection of her own divine fury. Her hunt was over, and here was her prize. Her thirst, which had become a constant, burning agony, roared to life. She descended, her fiery form casting a long dark shadow over the red lake. Her lips curled back in a triumphant snarl. She leaned down, her lioness face just inches from the surface, ready to drink her fill. She plunged her face into the crimson liquid, the coppery scent of blood filling her senses, promising to quench the unquenchable fire in her soul. She drank deeply. She lapped at the lake, the sheer volume of it a testament to her glorious massacre. But something was wrong. The taste, it was not the hot iron tang of lifeblood she craved. It was sweet, thick. It had a strange warmth that didn't come from a dying body, but from the sun itself, a fermented heat that spread not on her tongue, but in her belly. She paused, lifting her blood and beer-stained muzzle from the lake. A flicker of confusion crossed her feline features. The rage still burned, but the fuel was different. It wasn't stoking the flames, it was banking them, smothering them under a heavy, pleasant blanket. She looked at her reflection in the red pool. The crazed, bloodshot eyes staring back at her seemed softer. The snarl on her lips felt heavier, harder to maintain. Her divine mind, a nexus of pure, calculated fury, began to cloud. The sharp edges of her purpose, the crystal-clear command from her father Ra, started to blur. The screams of humanity, which had been a symphony to her ears, now sounded distant, muffled. The thirst, that all-consuming, world-ending thirst, was being replaced by a languid, creeping drowsiness. She shook her massive head, trying to clear the fog, to reignite the inferno. But with every lap of the strange, sweet blood, the fog grew thicker. She drank more, convinced that volume would overcome the strange taste, that she could drown this bizarre sensation in a tide of vengeance. Fields of barley, thousands of them, crushed and fermented with the sacred red ochre from Elephantine Island, flowed into her gullet. A river of divine craftsmanship, a potion brewed by the god of knowledge himself, was doing what no army, no mortal, no god could do. It was disarming the eye of Ra. The fire in her veins didn't die. It transmuted. The sharp, destructive heat that demanded annihilation softened into a glowing, radiant warmth that demanded nothing. Simply was. Her muscles, coiled tight for the kill, began to relax. Her claws, extended and ready to rend flesh from bone, slowly retracted into their sheaths. The roar that was building in her chest, a sound that could shatter mountains, dissolved into a low, rumbling purr. She blinked slowly, her heavy eyelids feeling like stone. The world, once a canvas for her bloody art, was now just a comfortable place to lie down. She stumbled away from the lake, her gait unsteady. She who had moved with the lethal grace of a stalking predator, now lurched like a newborn fawn. The great and terrible Sekhmet, the incarnation of divine wrath, was drunk. Utterly, cosmically drunk. She found a spot on the blood-soaked earth, the ground still warm from the life that had so recently departed it. She circled once, twice, and then collapsed into a heap of fur, muscle, and divine power. And for the first time in days, a profound silence fell over the land of Egypt. The slaughter was over. Sekhmet slept. She awoke to a world washed clean. The sun, her father's eye in the sky, felt gentle on her face, not like a call to arms. The air no longer smelled of blood and fear, but of the damp earth and the cool morning breeze. She sat up, her head a cavern of dull, echoing pain. The memories came back not as a triumphant blaze, but as disjointed, nightmarish flashes. A scream, a flash of red, the crunch of bone, the sheer, intoxicating power, and then the strange, sweet taste of the red lake. A feeling she had never known washed over her, shame, a deep, gut-wrenching horror at the ruin she had wrought. She saw the empty villages, the silent fields, the world she had nearly unmade. The rage was gone, and in its absence was a hollow, aching void. She was a weapon without a war, a fire without fuel. Who was she, if not the destroyer? As if in answer to her silent question, a light descended from the heavens. It was Ra in his full, unbearable glory. He did not look upon her with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. He saw his daughter, his beautiful, terrible weapon, curled up amidst the devastation he had ordered. He saw the confusion and the remorse in her eyes. He knew he could not destroy her. She was a part of him, the fury that was his right as king of the gods. To extinguish her would be to extinguish a part of himself, to render himself impotent. But he could not allow her to remain as she was. That power unchecked was a threat to the very fabric of creation. The balance Ma'at had been shattered, and it was his duty to restore it. So he did not condemn her. He remade her. He reached out and touched her brow, and his touch did not burn but soothed. He spoke, and his voice was not a command but an offering. He told her that her power, the Sekhmet, was not evil. It was a force of nature like a flood or an earthquake. But a flood could also bring fertile silt, and the shifting of the earth could create new mountains. Her power did not have to be solely for destruction. He gave her a new name, a new purpose to exist alongside the old one. He called her Hathor. While Sekhmet was the fire that consumes, Hathor would be the warmth of the sun that nurtures. While Sekhmet was the bringer of plagues and pestilence, Hathor would be the patroness of healing, music, and joy. While Sekhmet was the savage lioness who stalked the desert, Hathor would be the gentle cow, the mother of mothers, the embodiment of love and life. It was a masterful act of divine alchemy. He did not erase Sekhmet. He contained her. He built a beautiful gilded cage of love and joy around the core of incandescent rage. Sekhmet the destroyer and Hathor the creator were not two different goddesses. They were two faces of the same terrifying divine feminine power. The Egyptians understood this better than anyone. They knew that the same force that could create life could, in an instant, snatch it away. The mother who nurtures can also be the mother who disciplines, whose anger is the most terrifying of all. And so Sekhmet Hathor rose, her identity fractured, her purpose doubled. The bloodlust was gone, but the memory of it, the potential for it, remained sleeping just beneath the surface. She was now a goddess of duality, a walking paradox of fury and grace, of death and life. Humanity, what was left of it, slowly emerged from their hiding places. They looked upon the pacified goddess with a new kind of terror. Before, it was the fear of a wild animal, a natural disaster. Now it was a more intimate, more complex fear. They understood that their survival had been a fluke, the result of a divine trick. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had nearly swallowed them whole. The slaughter was over. The Eye of Ra was pacified, but the fire that had nearly consumed the world wasn't extinguished. It was merely banked, and the Egyptians knew with a primal bone-deep certainty that they would have to spend the rest of eternity making sure it never, ever flared up again. Their very survival would now depend on a complex, dangerous game of divine appeasement. And so the world held its breath. The rampage was over, but the silence that followed was not one of peace. It was the tense, watchful silence of a world that had just survived the unsurvivable. Every sunrise was a question, every sunset a temporary reprieve. The Egyptians now lived in the shadow of a sleeping lioness, and they knew with the chilling clarity of near extinction that their every action, every prayer, every ritual was now dedicated to one single monumental task: keeping her asleep. This wasn't about worship in the way we might understand it today. This was about survival. This was cosmic risk management on an unprecedented scale. Imagine living next to a nuclear reactor that is also a sentient, emotional being. A being that provides immense power but could, on a whim, melt down and obliterate everything you hold dear. You wouldn't just pray to it. You would study it. You would learn its every mood, its every trigger. You would build an entire infrastructure, a class of highly trained specialists whose sole job was to monitor it, to soothe it, to keep it stable. This was the new reality of Egypt. Sekhmet, the Eye of Ra, was that reactor. And the priests of Sekhmet were its eternal technicians. These priests were not your average clergymen. They were a unique blend of shaman, doctor, and divine lion tamer. Known as the Wab priests of Sekhmet, they were specialists in divine appeasement. They understood that you couldn't reason with a force like Sekhmet. You couldn't bargain with her or appeal to her better nature, not when her rage was simmering just below the surface. Instead, you had to manage her divine energy. You had to placate her ka, her life force, the very essence of her being. Their entire discipline was built around a single terrifying premise. Sekhmet was always hungry. She was always thirsty. And if she wasn't given what she craved, she would take it. So they fed her. Every single day, in temples across the land, A precise and unyielding series of rituals unfolded. The air would grow thick with the smoke of incense, specifically chosen for its calming properties. Offerings were laid before her statues, not just any offerings, but the richest foods, the finest linens, the most succulent cuts of meat, often from gazelles or wild fowl, animals that evoked the wildness she embodied. The goal was to satisfy her primal, predatory nature through symbolism. Music was a critical tool. The gentle, hypnotic rhythm of the sistrum, a sacred rattle, was played constantly. Its soft metallic shaking was believed to soothe the goddess, to literally charm the savage beast within. But this went far beyond daily offerings. The scale of this appeasement project is almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend. The greatest example of this comes from the reign of the pharaoh Amenhotep III. At his mortuary temple in Thebes, archaeologists have uncovered a truly staggering sight: hundreds upon hundreds of life-size statues of Sekhmet, carved from black granodiorite. Originally, it's believed there were 730 of them, 2 for every single day of the year. One statue of her seated, representing her calm, pacified state, and one of her standing, often holding the papyrus scepter, embodying her raw, active power. Think about that. A different statue for every morning, and a different one for every evening. Each one would have received individual rituals, litanies, and offerings. This wasn't just art or decoration. This was a massive state-sponsored spiritual engine, designed to perpetually manage the most dangerous force in the universe. It was an attempt to trap her in a daily cycle of placation, to use the sheer weight of ritual and repetition to pin down her volatile spirit. The pharaoh was essentially building a spiritual cage made of stone and prayer, hoping to contain a goddess whose rage could unmake the world. And yet, even this monumental effort wasn't enough. Daily rituals could manage the ambient threat, but the anniversary of her rampage, the memory of her bloodlust, was a wound in the cosmic calendar. It had to be addressed. And the Egyptians, in their profound psychological wisdom, knew you couldn't fight fire with water. You had to fight it with a bigger, more controlled fire. This led to the creation of one of the most wild, most important, and most misunderstood festivals in all of ancient history: the Festival of Drunkenness. This was the ultimate act of appeasement. It took place at the beginning of the year, right around the time of the Nile's annual flood, a time of renewal and chaos, the perfect moment to confront the memory of destruction. The entire population was expected to participate. This wasn't a solemn, quiet affair in a temple. This was a nationwide, state-mandated party. The core of the festival was a ritualistic reenactment of Sekhmet's pacification. The people would gather, and the state would provide enormous quantities of beer, which was often dyed red with pomegranate juice or red ochre to explicitly resemble the blood beer that had saved them all. And then they drank. They drank to excess. They drank until they passed out. This was not simple hedonism. It was a sacred duty. By getting blindingly drunk, they were entering a state of altered consciousness, blurring the lines between the human and the divine. They were symbolically joining Sekhmet in her own intoxicated state, reaffirming the moment of her transformation from destroyer to protector. The festival was a riot of noise and music and dance. The goal was to create a joyful, chaotic clamor that would please the goddess, a goddess who, in her calmer aspect, was known as the Lady of Jubilation. They were trying to overwhelm her simmering rage with an outpouring of collective, ecstatic joy. Imagine the scene: thousands of people, from the highest official to the humblest farmer, singing, dancing, and drinking red beer under the hot Egyptian sun, their inhibitions washed away in a tide of alcohol and religious fervor. It was a way of looking into the abyss of their near destruction and laughing, a way of transforming their greatest trauma into their greatest celebration. By embracing the chaos of drunkenness, they were neutralizing the far more dangerous chaos of Sekhmet's wrath. They were reminding her and themselves of the story. They were making the myth real, for one day a year, to ensure the nightmare never became real again. But here is where the story takes its most fascinating turn. The Egyptians believed that once Sekhmet was pacified, once she was sated with offerings, soothed with music, and celebrated with drunkenness, her immense and terrifying power didn't just disappear. It transformed. The same divine energy that could cause plagues and level cities, when properly managed and calmed, could be turned to its polar opposite. The arrow of plague could become the scalpel of a surgeon. The fiery breath of destruction could become the warmth of life. The priests who managed her fury were also the ones who could call upon her mercy. The Wab priests of Sekhmet were not just appeasers. They were known as the finest doctors in Egypt. They understood that the goddess who held the power to send the 7 arrows of pestilence was also the only one powerful enough to call them back. Appeasing the Lady of Slaughter was the first critical step. The second was to unlock the power of the Lady of Life. They had survived her rage, they had learned to manage her power, and now they would begin to wield her gift. The Lioness of Destruction was about to become the patroness of healing. How does a being forged in the fires of divine wrath, a creature whose very breath is the desert wind and whose roar is the plague, become a source of comfort and cure? This is the great paradox of Sekhmet, and it is the key to understanding her profound and enduring power. The answer lies not in a sudden change of heart, but in a shift of perspective. The Egyptians didn't see destruction and healing as opposites. They saw them as two sides of the same terrifyingly powerful coin. To control a force, you must first understand it. To create a cure, you must first understand the disease. And no one, divine or mortal, understood disease and death better than Sekhmet. This transformation wasn't left to chance. It was managed, mediated, and ritualized by a specialized class of priests, men who walked the razor's edge between divine fury and mortal fragility. These were the priests of Sekhmet, and they were not your average clergy. They were a unique blend of physician, exorcist, veterinarian, and diplomat to the divine. Their temples, particularly at Memphis and Thebes, were not just places of worship. They were centers of medical study and magical defense. They were the ancient world's equivalent of the CDC, with a high priestess who could literally unleash the apocalypse if she wasn't properly appeased. Imagine their daily reality. Their entire profession was based on soothing a goddess who was, by her very nature, rage incarnate. Every prayer, every offering, every ritual was a delicate negotiation, a constant effort to keep the lioness calm, to keep her purring rather than roaring. They were known as the Wab priests, the pure ones, because they had to be ritually clean to even approach her presence. But they had another name, a more telling one: the magicians of Sekhmet. This is crucial. In the Egyptian mind, medicine and magic were inseparable. A disease wasn't just a biological malfunction. It was an attack. It could be a punishment from a god, the work of a malevolent demon, or the curse of a restless spirit. Therefore, a cure couldn't just be physical. You couldn't simply give someone a poultice for a wound inflicted by a god's anger. You had to treat the source. You had to appease the divine, exorcise the demon, and only then could the physical body begin to heal. The priests of Sekhmet were the grandmasters of this integrated science. They studied the movements of the stars, the anatomy of the human body, and the precise lyrical words that could calm a furious goddess. Their primary role was preventative. They were the first line of defense against the slaughterers and messengers of Sekhmet, demonic entities that carried out her will, spreading pestilence and misery. These were often called the 7 arrows of Sekhmet, each a personification of a different affliction, from fevers to plagues. The priest's job was to know the names of these demons, to understand their nature, and to perform the rituals that would ward them off. They created amulets inscribed with protective spells, charms that a person could wear to make themselves invisible to the goddess's wrathful gaze. Their incantations weren't just pleas for mercy. They were complex magical formulas, a kind of spiritual negotiation. A typical spell might involve identifying the demon by name, stating that the afflicted person is under the protection of a more powerful god, like Thoth or Horus, and then commanding the demon to depart. It was a cosmic legal battle fought in the realm of spirits, with the patient's life hanging in the balance. When prevention failed, they moved to treatment. A person falling ill, especially during the hot, dangerous days of the summer when disease was rampant, was seen as having been touched by Sekhmet. The priest-physician would arrive, not with a simple medical bag, but with a toolkit of both the sacred and the scientific. They would examine the patient, diagnosing the physical symptoms with a surprisingly sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and illness. But their diagnosis went deeper. Was this the work of the demon of the north wind? Was it a punishment for a broken oath? The priest had to determine the spiritual root of the physical problem. The prescription would be twofold. First, the magical. A ritual of appeasement to Sekhmet would be performed, often involving offerings of beer, stained red to resemble blood, a constant reminder of the myth that saved humanity. They would recite litanies to soothe her, praising her beauty, her strength, and her power, essentially flattering the divine lioness into a state of calm. They would perform an exorcism to drive out the specific arrow that had caused the sickness. Then came the physical treatment. The priests of Sekhmet were renowned herbalists. They compounded remedies from plants, minerals, and animal products, willow bark for pain, honey as an antiseptic, concoctions of herbs to reduce fever. But even these physical remedies were imbued with magic. The ingredients had to be gathered at specific astrological times, and the prescription would be recited over the medicine, infusing it with divine power. The patient wasn't just drinking a brew of herbs, they were consuming a liquefied prayer, a physical manifestation of the priest's magical work. This is the genius of the Egyptian system, and the core of Sekhmet's healing aspect. They didn't try to deny her destructive power, they embraced it. They reasoned that the one who has the power to inflict a wound is also the one with the ultimate power to heal it. She who sends the plague is the only one who can truly command it to retreat. She is both the poison and the antidote. The priests didn't see themselves as fighting against Sekhmet when they healed someone. They saw themselves as channeling her power, redirecting it. They were convincing her to turn her fearsome energy from destruction to restoration. They were asking the goddess who could unmake the body to use that same intimate knowledge to remake it, to knit bone back to bone and restore the breath of life. This is why she earned titles like Sekhmet, the Lady of Life, and the Great One of Healing. It wasn't because she was gentle, it was because she was powerful. Her healing was not the soft, comforting touch of a mother goddess. It was the fierce, terrifying, and absolute power of a warrior who decides to protect rather than destroy. Her healing was a display of her ultimate authority over life and death. She could take a life with a single glance, but she could also preserve it. And that made her protection the most valuable in the entire pantheon. When you prayed to Sekhmet for healing, you weren't just asking for a cure. You were asking the ultimate predator to mark you as one of her own, to place you under the protection of her terrifying might, shielding you from the very forces she herself commanded. The hundreds of statues of Sekhmet erected by Amenhotep III at his temple complex in Thebes weren't just monuments of fear. They were a massive architectural prayer for health. It's believed a different statue was used for rituals each day of the year, a constant, year-long project of appeasement and worship designed to keep the nation healthy and protected. This was applied theology on a grand scale. The king understood that the health of his people, the stability of his kingdom, depended on keeping the Lady of Slaughter satisfied. By giving her the worship she craved, he was harnessing her power for the good of Egypt. He was transforming the nation's greatest threat into its greatest guardian. This was the delicate balance that defined Sekhmet's role in Egyptian society. A force of nature so deadly that it had to be tamed, and in its taming, became the most powerful source of preservation the world had ever known. She was the divine surgeon, whose hands, once drenched in blood, now held the power to cut away disease and restore the body whole. But this duality wasn't just about public health and national security. It was about to become deeply personal, as Sekhmet took on a new role, not just as a distant cosmic force, but as a wife and a mother. And so, the most terrifying force in the Egyptian pantheon was domesticated. Or was she? The very idea is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine trying to put a leash on a supernova, or asking a hurricane to settle down and start a family. Yet, this is precisely the story the Egyptians told themselves. The blood-drenched lioness, the Eye of Ra, the bringer of plague and pestilence, was to be bound by the vows of marriage. This wasn't a story of taming, not really. You can't tame a fundamental force of nature. This was a story of balance. It was an attempt by the mortal mind to find harmony in the universe, to believe that even the most chaotic, destructive energy could be anchored by an opposing and equal creative force. The deity chosen for this monumental task was no warrior king or sky god. He was Ta, and at first glance, he seems like the most unlikely partner imaginable for Sekhmet. Ta was the god of craftsmen, of architects, of sculptors and metalworkers. He wasn't a god of grand cosmic battles. He was a god of the quiet, focused, and deliberate act of creation. While Sekhmet represented the raw, untamed, and explosive power that could level mountains, Ta was the meticulous artist who built them in the first place. He was often depicted as a man tightly wrapped in linen like a mummy, holding a scepter that combined the symbols of life, stability, and power. His hands and his mind were always busy building, shaping, and bringing order from raw materials. He was the patron of the capital city, Memphis, a city he was said to have created simply by thinking it into existence. He was thought, deliberation, and design. She was instinct, rage, and action. He was the steady hand. She was the consuming fire. Their union was a theological masterstroke. It formed what is known as the Memphis Triad, a divine family of father, mother, and son that served as the spiritual heart of Egypt's most powerful city. This wasn't just a mythological soap opera. It was a profound statement about the nature of reality itself. By marrying Ta, the god of creation, to Sekhmet, the goddess of destruction, the Egyptians were saying that these two forces were not enemies. They were partners. They were two essential halves of a single cosmic cycle. You cannot have creation without the potential for destruction. You cannot build a new world without clearing away the old. Ta and Sekhmet, the architect of the universe and the force of its potential unmaking, were bound together. Their marriage wasn't so much a romance as it was a cosmic necessity. It was the ultimate expression of yin and yang, a divine treaty between order and chaos, ensuring that neither could ever fully overwhelm the other. And from this impossible union, a child was born, a son. If you were to guess what the child of the goddess of slaughter and the god of creation would be like, you might imagine a god of divine retribution, a being of perfectly calculated warfare. But the Egyptians imagined something far more beautiful and far more profound. Their son was Nefertum, and Nefertum was the god of the blue lotus flower. Think about that for a moment. The child of fire and earth, of rage and calm, was a flower. But not just any flower. The blue lotus was one of the most sacred symbols in ancient Egypt. It would close its petals at night and sink below the murky water, only to rise again with the dawn and bloom, releasing a beautiful, intoxicating fragrance. For the Egyptians, it was the ultimate symbol of rebirth, of healing, and of the sunrise itself. Nefertum, whose name means beautiful one who closes or he who is beautiful, represented the dawn that follows the darkest night. He was the scent of perfume, the promise of a new day, the quiet healing that comes after a fever has broken. He was the living, breathing proof that the union of destruction and creation doesn't lead to more conflict, but to beauty. He was the delicate blossom that could only grow because of the volatile energy of his mother and the steady foundation of his father. This family, Ta the creator, Sekhmet the destroyer, and Nefertum the symbol of rebirth, became the lens through which Egyptians understood their world. It told them that life was a constant interplay of these forces. There would be times of plague and war, the breath of Sekhmet on their necks. But there would also be times of building and innovation, the hand of Ta guiding their own. And always, always there was the promise of Nefertum, the promise that the sun would rise again, that beauty could emerge from the mud, that life would be renewed. This new role as a wife and mother fundamentally changed how ordinary people related to Sekhmet. It gave her a new dimension. She was no longer just the distant, terrifying goddess you prayed to in order to avert a national catastrophe. She was now also a mother. And what is a mother if not a fierce protector? This new identity didn't erase her destructive nature. It focused it. The rage was still there, the power was undiminished, but now it had a purpose that every Egyptian could understand on a deeply personal level. The lioness was now guarding her cubs. Amulets of Sekhmet became incredibly popular for personal protection. A pregnant woman might wear one, not just to pray for Sekhmet's healing powers to ensure a safe birth, but to invoke her terrifying protective wrath against any spirit or sickness that might harm her unborn child. A soldier going into battle might carry her image, not just as a goddess of war, but as a protective mother who would slaughter anyone who threatened her children, and the people of Egypt were all her children. She became the divine matriarch, the ultimate protective instinct. If you were under her protection, you had the most ferocious guardian in the entire cosmos watching your back. But if you threatened her family or her people, you would face the same incandescent rage that nearly ended the world. She was now both the cause of the disease and the mother who would fight to the death to heal it. She was the fire that could burn down your house, and the fiercely protective warmth of the family hearth. This duality made her one of the most complex and powerful deities in the pantheon. She hadn't been tamed by Ta. She had been given an anchor. She hadn't been weakened by motherhood. She had been made infinitely more dangerous, because now her destruction had a laser focus. She didn't cease to be the destroyer. She simply gained something and someone worth protecting. This transformation from a force of pure, indiscriminate chaos into a focused, purposeful guardian is one of the most compelling shifts in religious history. It shows a deep human need to believe that even our greatest fears, our most destructive impulses, can be harnessed for the sake of love and protection. But the fire of a star, even when contained, is still a star. And the Egyptians never, ever forgot that the protective mother watching over them still had the heart of a killer and the teeth of a lion. And it's in that paradox, that razor's edge between annihilation and preservation, that we find the most fascinating and perhaps most vital aspect of Sekhmet's worship. Because the same force that could unmake the world was also the only one capable of putting it back together. The hand that delivered the plague was the only hand that held the cure. To understand this, you have to understand how the ancient Egyptians saw the world. To them, sickness wasn't just a random biological event. It was an attack, a targeted, supernatural assault. And the divine archer firing those invisible arrows of pestilence, the commander of the demonic messengers who brought fever and death, was Sekhmet. She was known as the Lady of Pestilence. The annual plagues that often swept up the Nile with the summer heat were called the messengers of Sekhmet. They were her agents, her weapons, unleashed upon a populace that had somehow failed her. A bad harvest, a lost battle, a king's hubris. Any disruption in the cosmic order of Ma'at could be seen as a slight, and Sekhmet's response was swift and terrifying. A cough, a fever, a rash. These weren't just symptoms. They were the goddesses calling cards. It was a profoundly personal kind of terror. The universe wasn't indifferent. It was actively hostile, and the source of that hostility had a name and a face, the face of a lioness. So if you fell ill, you weren't just fighting a disease. You were fighting a deity. And you don't fight a goddess with medicine alone. You fight her with prayer, with ritual, with appeasement. This is where a very special class of people come in, the priests of Sekhmet. These weren't just your typical clergy, chanting hymns and burning incense. They were Egypt's doctors. They were physicians of the highest order, specialists who blended what we would call science and magic into a single potent practice. They were known as the Wab, with the pure ones, and their job was to stand between the fury of their goddess and the fragility of mankind. When a patient came to them, the diagnosis was twofold. First, the physical ailment, a broken bone, a festering wound, a burning fever. But second, and more importantly, the spiritual cause. What had this person done to anger the goddess? What sin, what impurity, what transgression had brought the arrows of Sekhmet to their door? The treatment, therefore, was also twofold. On one hand, the priests would set a bone, stitch a wound, or prescribe a poultice of honey and herbs, practical, effective medicine. Egypt's medical knowledge was, for its time, astonishingly advanced. But that was only half the battle. The other half was appeasing the goddess herself. This meant incantations, spells, and rituals designed to cool her hot rage. The priest doctor would recite prayers, begging Sekhmet to withdraw her demonic messengers. They would perform purification rites to cleanse the patient of the transgression that had caused the illness. They would offer sacrifices at her altars, trying to bargain with the source of the suffering. It was a holistic approach born of sheer terror. You had to treat the body, yes, but you absolutely had to pacify the divine executioner, or the physical treatment was meaningless. She would just strike again. This is why Sekhmet, the destroyer, also held titles like the Lady of Life. She was the ultimate source of healing precisely because she was the ultimate source of sickness. Who better to call off the attack dogs than their own master? This duality is the absolute key to her power. She wasn't a goddess of healing in the gentle, nurturing sense, like a goddess of hearth and home. Her healing was the cessation of hostilities. It was a pardon. To be healed by Sekhmet was to have a death sentence commuted, and you were expected to be eternally grateful for it. Nowhere is this desperate, large-scale appeasement more evident than in the staggering project undertaken by one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, Amenhotep III. Around 1390 BC, during the height of the New Kingdom, Egypt was a global superpower. Rich, dominant, and seemingly invincible. But it's believed that a devastating plague, perhaps bubonic plague, swept through the empire, killing thousands and threatening the stability of the entire nation. It was a crisis of unimaginable proportions, and when faced with an enemy he couldn't fight with chariots and bows, Amenhotep turned to the only power he believed could save them. He commissioned an unprecedented number of statues of Sekhmet, not 10, not 50, not even 100. He ordered the creation of over 700 statues of the lioness goddess. Most scholars believe the plan was to have 2 statues for every single day of the year, one seated, one standing. These were placed in his mortuary temple and, most famously, in the precinct of Mut at Karnak. Imagine the scene: a vast courtyard, shimmering in the Egyptian sun, filled with a silent stone army of lion-headed goddesses. Every single day, priests would move from one statue to the next, performing a specific ritual, leaving an offering, and chanting a prayer of appeasement. A different statue for the morning, a different one for the evening, 365 days a year. A relentless, perpetual cycle of worship designed to keep the goddess's rage at bay for every moment of every day. This wasn't just art. This was a national defense program. It was the ancient equivalent of a billion-dollar medical research initiative, forged in granite and diorite. The sheer cost and manpower involved would have been astronomical. It speaks to a level of fear we can barely comprehend. The most powerful man on earth, a living god in the eyes of his people, was so terrified of Sekhmet's wrath that he dedicated a significant portion of his kingdom's wealth to building her a forest of stone effigies, hoping it would be enough to placate her. And the priests who served in these temples weren't just praying. They were practicing medicine. They were the heads of the ancient Egyptian FDA. Texts show that the priests of Sekhmet were responsible for approving medical texts and treatments. If you wanted to write a new medical papyrus, it had to be vetted by them. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge, because they served the gatekeeper of life and death. And their expertise wasn't limited to humans. In a society that revered animals, especially cats and cattle, Sekhmet's priests were also the world's first known veterinarians. It makes perfect sense. The great lioness, the ultimate predator, was the patron of those who healed the animal kingdom. They understood that her plague didn't distinguish between man and beast. So you have this incredible fusion of roles. Sekhmet is the goddess of war, but also the patron of doctors. She's the bringer of plague, but the ultimate source of healing. She's the mistress of terror, but the protector of life. It's a constant, terrifying balancing act. The Egyptians lived their lives on this balance beam. They knew that health was not a guarantee. It was a temporary truce, a ceasefire negotiated daily by the priests on their behalf. Every sunrise you were healthy was a gift, a sign that Sekhmet was for now satisfied. Her rage was a sleeping lion, and the job of all of Egypt, from the pharaoh down to the farmer, was to do everything in their power not to wake her. Because they knew that her healing was not a gentle touch, but simply the withdrawal of her killing blow. It was the brief, precious silence after the roar. So how do you live with a force like that? How do you build a civilization on the edge of a volcano that might erupt not from geological pressure, but from a bad mood? You don't try to master it. You don't try to defeat it. You try to manage it. The entire religious and political structure of ancient Egypt was, in many ways, a massive, ongoing, incredibly complex project in divine appeasement. It was a negotiation, held every single day, with the destructive potential of the universe itself. And at the heart of this negotiation was a specialized class of men, the priests of Sekhmet. These weren't your average priests, chanting hymns in quiet temples. They were more like a divine special ops team, a bomb squad for the soul of the nation. They were physicians, exorcists, and magicians all rolled into one. They understood that Sekhmet's wrath wasn't just a metaphor for abstract evil. It was a tangible force that manifested in the real world. They called this wrath the 7 arrows of Sekhmet, a terrifying arsenal of plagues and disasters she could unleash upon the world at any moment. These weren't just 7 random calamities. They were the personification of every fear that haunted the ancient world. The arrow of disease that swept through a village, the arrow of famine that cracked the earth, the arrow of madness, of discord, of scorching winds. Each arrow was a specific messenger of her displeasure, and the priests were the only ones who knew the codes to recall them. Their work was a delicate art. They were known as the Wab priests, the pure ones, and their purity was essential, because they were dealing with a power that could annihilate them for the slightest mistake. They were the doctors of ancient Egypt, and their medical texts, like the Ebers Papyrus, are filled with spells and incantations right alongside practical medical advice. To them, there was no difference between a microbe and a demon. A fever wasn't just a symptom. It was the hot breath of the goddess on your neck. So a priest of Sekhmet wouldn't just give you a poultice of willow bark. He would perform a ritual to placate the goddess, to persuade her to withdraw her burning touch. It was a holistic approach born of sheer terror, Treat the body, but for God's sake, appease the divine anger that caused the ailment in the first place. And this appeasement was a constant, daily grind. Imagine the anxiety. Every sunrise was a potential trigger. Every strange weather pattern, every political squabble, every sick cow could be a sign that she was stirring. So the rituals were relentless. They offered her rivers of beer and wine, a constant echo of the trick that saved humanity, hoping to keep her in a state of perpetual blissful intoxication. They draped her statues in red linen, the color of blood and chaos, not to provoke her, but to honor and contain her nature. They chanted litanies designed to soothe her, to literally cool her heart. These weren't just prayers, they were intricate spells, a form of divine diplomacy, using precise language to navigate her volatile temper. Nowhere was this anxiety more palpable than during the turning of the year. The last 5 days of the Egyptian calendar were considered horrifyingly dangerous. It was a liminal space, a time when the barriers between worlds grew thin, when demons and disease could slip through the cracks. During this period, the entire country held its breath. It was believed that the messengers of Sekhmet were most active, carrying out her orders of destruction. To survive, the Egyptians performed elaborate, nationwide rituals. They recited the Book of the Last Day of the Year, a series of powerful spells for protection. They lit torches, created protective amulets, and stayed indoors, essentially putting the whole country on lockdown until the danger had passed and the new year dawned. It was a national recognition that their survival depended entirely on her mercy. For the common person, who couldn't afford a team of priests, protection was a more personal affair. They carried amulets. Millions of them have been found. The most common was the Wajet, the Eye of Horus, which was also seen as the healed and contained eye of Sekhmet herself. Wearing it was like wearing a tiny, personal shield, a constant reminder to the goddess of her own moment of healing and reconciliation. They also wore small figurines of Sekhmet, not as a sign of worship in the loving sense, but more like a warning to other evil forces. Don't mess with me. I'm with her. It was the spiritual equivalent of walking through a rough neighborhood with the biggest, baddest bodyguard imaginable. But no act of appeasement, no personal amulet, can compare to the project undertaken by one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, Amenhotep III. In the 14th century BC, this pharaoh, the grandfather of Tutankhamun, commissioned an act of devotion so vast, so obsessive, it borders on madness. At his mortuary temple in Thebes and at the precinct of Mud at Karnak, he ordered the construction of over 730 statues of Sekhmet. Let that number sink in. 730. One for every morning and every evening of the year. This wasn't just art. This was a weaponized prayer. An army of stone goddesses built to hold back an invisible tide of fear. Most scholars believe Amenhotep III was suffering from a painful, debilitating disease, perhaps arthritis so severe it crippled him. He, the living god, the most powerful man on earth, was being humbled by his own body. And in his desperation, he turned to the one goddess who held absolute dominion over both sickness and its cure. He wasn't just asking for help. He was trying to overwhelm Sekhmet with devotion, to create a fortress of granite praise so dense that no disease, no arrow of her wrath could possibly penetrate it. Imagine the scene. A vast temple complex, filled with row upon row of identical larger-than-life statues of the lioness goddess. Each one carved from black diorite, a stone as hard as iron, gleaming in the Egyptian sun. Each one seated on a throne, holding the ankh of life, staring forward with those unervingly serene, predatory eyes. And every single day, the priests would have a specific ritual for a specific statue. In the morning, they would approach the statue for that day and make offerings, chant the cooling litanies, and beg for the protection of Egypt for the next 12 hours. Then in the evening, they would move to that day's second statue and do it all over again, pleading for her to keep the nation safe through the perils of the night. Day after day, year after year. A perpetual, moving ritual through a forest of stone goddesses. It is one of the most staggering displays of religious devotion and raw primal fear in human history. It was a pharaoh's desperate attempt to build a dam against the fury of a god. He was trying to systematize her appeasement, to turn the chaotic, unpredictable nature of Sekhmet into a predictable, manageable daily transaction. Pay the goddess her due respect, and she grants you another 24 hours of life. It was a beautiful, terrifying, and ultimately fragile system. because they were about to learn that you cannot put a leash on a cosmic fire. You cannot bargain with a plague. And while they were busy building an army of stone in her image, Sekhmet's identity was already beginning to shift, to merge with another power, a creature of the night with a very different, and far more complicated, reputation. This new deity was Batet, the cat goddess of the Nile Delta. And at first glance, she couldn't have been more different from the terrifying lioness of Memphis. Where Sekhmet was the raw, untamed fury of the desert sun, Batet was the gentle warmth of the hearth. Where Sekhmet was the goddess of war, plague, and divine retribution, Batet was the goddess of the home, of fertility, of music, dance, and pleasure. Sekhmet was a predator who stalked the battlefield. Batet was a protector who guarded the family. To understand how these two polar opposites could possibly become one, you have to understand the Egyptian mind. They didn't see the world in simple binaries of good and evil. They saw it as a place of balanced dualistic forces. The flood and the drought, the desert and the fertile black land, day and night. And in this worldview, the ferocious lioness and the domestic cat were not enemies. They were two expressions of the same feline power. One was the face it showed to its enemies, the other the face it showed to its family. Bastet's cult was centered in the city of Perbast, which the Greeks later called Bubastis, and her worship was anything but somber. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the annual festival of Batet as the most popular and extravagant party in all of Egypt. He wrote of barges packed with people floating down the Nile, men playing pipes, women playing rattles and singing, clapping their hands. At every town along the river, they would pull ashore, and the party would spill out, with the women shouting, dancing, and celebrating with an almost frantic energy. When they finally arrived at Bubastis, he claimed that more wine was consumed at this single festival than in the entire rest of the year. It was a massive, joyous, and deeply uninhibited celebration of life, pleasure, and the protective power of the goddess. Now imagine you're an ancient Egyptian. You know Sekhmet as the Lady of Dread, the one whose breath is the hot desert wind, the bringer of pestilence who must be constantly appeased with statues and prayers. And then you hear about this other goddess, this Lady of Charm, whose worship involves music, wine, and ecstatic celebration. They're both feline. They're both daughters of Ra. They both represent a powerful female solar energy. It's only a matter of time before the lines begin to blur. This blurring wasn't just a grassroots phenomenon. It was driven by politics. As the political center of Egypt shifted over the centuries, different gods rose and fell in prominence. When dynasties from the Nile Delta, the heart of Bastet's territory, came to power, they brought their patron goddess with them. To integrate her into the established national pantheon, they needed to connect her to the older, more powerful gods. And who was more powerful in the old capital of Memphis than Sekhmet? So a new theology began to emerge. Sekhmet and Batet weren't just sisters. They were two sides of the same coin. They were different aspects or manifestations of the same divine being. Sekhmet was the violent, destructive power of the sun at its midday peak, the scorching, blinding glare that could bring death and disease. Batet, on the other hand, was the gentler, life-giving power of the sun in the morning and evening, the warmth that nurtured the crops and protected the home. This created a deity of incredible complexity. She was now Sekhmet Bastet, a single goddess who embodied both the terrifying and the tender. She was the power that could unleash a plague upon the world, and she was the power that could protect your children from sickness. She was the roar of the lioness that scattered armies, and she was the purr of the cat that brought peace to the household. This syncretism, this merging of identities, fundamentally changed how Sekhmet was perceived. It softened her edges without diminishing her power. It gave her a dimension of mercy to balance her wrath. Before, appeasing Sekhmet was a matter of survival. You prayed to her so she wouldn't destroy you. Now, with the influence of Batet, you could also pray to her for positive blessings, for joy, for love, for protection. She was no longer just the goddess you ran from. She was the goddess you could run to. Her priests, the same ones who were experts in medicine, now operated with this dual understanding. When they diagnosed an illness, they saw the hand of Sekhmet, the bringer of disease. But when they prescribed a cure, they invoked the protective, healing aspect of Batet. The very same goddess who sent the arrows of sickness was also the only one who could provide the shield. This is the ultimate expression of her role as a goddess of healing. True healing isn't just about curing symptoms. It's about understanding and pacifying the destructive force that caused the illness in the first place. By merging with Batet, Sekhmet became the embodiment of that principle. She held both the poison and the antidote within herself. This new, composite identity is reflected in the art. While Sekhmet is almost always shown with the head of a lioness, a symbol of raw power and royalty, Batet is most often depicted with the head of a domestic cat. But sometimes, in later periods, you see Batet depicted with a lioness head, a clear nod to her more ferocious alter ego. The Egyptians were making a visual statement. Don't be fooled by the gentle protector of the home. Inside every cat there is a lion, and inside the most fearsome lioness, there is a protector. This duality made her one of the most relatable and enduring goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. She reflected the reality of life itself. Life is full of dangers and threats, of plagues and disasters. That's Sekhmet's domain. But it's also full of joy, family, love, and celebration. That's the gift of Batet. To the Egyptians, these weren't separate realities. They were interwoven threads in the same great tapestry, all governed by the same complex, feline divinity. She was the divine mother who could be both fiercely protective and terrifyingly wrathful. She was the ultimate paradox, the destroyer who became the great protector, the lady of slaughter who became the guardian of life. For thousands of years, this dual identity defined her. From the grand temples of Memphis to the humble homes in Bubastis, she was worshipped as both the lion and the cat. Her power was feared, her mercy was sought, and her festivals were celebrated with wild abandon. She had survived her own rampage, evolved from a simple instrument of destruction into a sophisticated deity embodying one of life's greatest truths, that the power to heal is inseparable from the power to harm. She had become a symbol of balance. But the world of the pharaohs was not eternal. New empires would rise, new religions would sweep across the land, and the old gods of Egypt would face their greatest challenge yet. The pharaohs turned to dust, the temples crumbled, but the roar of the lioness was far from silenced. It was merely waiting, ready to be heard again in the most unexpected of places. With the arrival of new faiths, the cross and the crescent rose over the Nile, casting long shadows over the ancient pantheons. The temples of Sekhmet, once vibrant with chants and offerings, fell silent. Her name was chiseled away from cartouches, her stories dismissed as the fables of a bygone age. The Lady of Slaughter, the Great One of Healing, was seemingly buried beneath the sands of time, a relic of a world that no longer was. But you cannot truly bury a force like Sekhmet. You cannot silence the roar of the sun. For centuries she slept, not in death, but in a deep stony slumber, her power dormant within the thousands of statues that lined her forgotten sanctuaries. The world moved on, empires rose and fell, but the goddess of divine retribution was patient. Her awakening wouldn't come from the prayer of a priest, but from the ambition of an emperor and the crack of a soldier's shovel. In 1798, the armies of Napoleon Bonaparte marched into Egypt. They came for conquest, but they brought with them scholars, artists, and engineers. They came to claim a land, but they ended up unearthing a civilization. This was the birth of modern Egyptology. As they cleared the sand from the feet of the Sphinx and pushed open the doors to tombs sealed for millennia, they weren't just finding gold and artifacts, they were finding stories. And then came the key, the Rosetta Stone, a single slab of rock that allowed Jean-François Champollion to finally crack the code of hieroglyphs, turning silent symbols into a living language. And with that, the gods of Egypt spoke again for the first time in over 1,000 years. The roar of the lioness was finally heard. Suddenly, Sekhmet wasn't just a forgotten deity. She was an archaeological marvel. Excavations like the incredible Karnak Kashet unearthed hundreds upon hundreds of her statues, a silent granite army waiting to be discovered. Walk into the Egyptian Museum in Turin, the Louvre in Paris, or the British Museum in London today, and you can feel it. You can stand before her effigy, carved from black diorite that seems to drink the light from the room, and you feel a presence. This isn't just a rock. Tourists and scholars alike speak of an almost electric charge in the air around her statues, a sense of being watched by something ancient, powerful, and very, very real. These weren't just representations. To the ancient Egyptians, they were vessels, conduits for the goddess's ferocious spirit. And it seems some of that energy, some of that raw, untamable power still lingers. Her story, once resurrected, began to spread, seeping into the consciousness of the modern world. She became a character in our new mythology, pop culture. She appears in video games as a formidable boss to be overcome, a literalization of her role as a divine challenge. She stalks the pages of fantasy novels, a symbol of untamed feminine power. She is referenced in music and art. Her iconic lioness had a shorthand for ferocity, protection, and a terrifying beauty. Through these new mediums, her myth was no longer confined to dusty scrolls or museum placards. It was alive, evolving, being reinterpreted for a new generation who had never bowed at an Egyptian altar, but understood the language of power and transformation. But for some, this wasn't enough. Reading about her, seeing her in a museum, or fighting her in a video game felt like looking at a photograph of a wildfire. They wanted to feel the heat. This led to one of the most unexpected places her roar would be heard: the hearts of modern spiritual seekers. A revival of ancient Egyptian religion, known as Kemeticism or Kemetic orthodoxy, began to take root. People across the globe, disconnected by thousands of miles and thousands of years from the original worshippers, felt a profound call to this ancient path. And at the forefront of this revival was Sekhmet. Modern devotees don't see her as a monster to be appeased with beer. They see her as a vital, necessary force in a complicated world. They see the myth of the destruction of mankind not as a literal history, but as a powerful metaphor. They understand that sometimes a fire is necessary. Sekhmet becomes the patron of the personal apocalypse, the inner strength you call upon to destroy what is holding you back. She is the courage to quit the soul-crushing job, to walk away from the toxic relationship, to burn down the self-limiting beliefs that have kept you caged. She is the divine fury that says, "No more." She is the sacred rage that fuels revolutions, both personal and political. In a world that often tells people, especially women, to be quiet, to be nice, to swallow their anger, Sekhmet gives them permission to roar. And this is where her profound duality becomes more relevant than ever, because her modern followers know that her fire is not just for destruction, it is for purification. She is the fever that burns out the infection. Once the destructive work is done, her other side emerges, Sekhmet the healer. But her healing is not soft or gentle. It's not a comforting lullaby. It's the reset of a dislocated joint. It's the surgeon's scalpel that cuts away the disease. It is painful, direct, and brutally effective. It is the healing that comes from confronting the unvarnished truth. She forces you to look at your wounds, to clean them, to face the source of your pain so that you can truly, fundamentally recover, not just cover it with a bandage. This is Sekhmet's ultimate lesson. The reason her story has endured and found new life. She is the embodiment of a necessary paradox. She teaches us that creation and destruction are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. You cannot build a new, healthy life on rotten foundations. You must first have the courage to tear them down. She is the ultimate protector because she is willing to do what is necessary, not just what is easy. She is the fierce love that doesn't coddle, but challenges you to become stronger. In our modern world, we are surrounded by plagues of a different kind. Plagues of injustice, of apathy, of disinformation, of despair. Sekhmet's story serves as a powerful archetype. She is the force that rises up against stagnation and corruption. She is the divine immune system, rushing to confront the sickness in the world. But she is also the wisdom that knows when to stop, the compassion that turns the tide from pure destruction to focused healing. She is the perfect balance of ferocity and grace. So, the next time you feel that surge of righteous anger at injustice, that is the whisper of Sekhmet. The moment you find the strength to cut ties with something that is poisoning your spirit, that is her power moving through you. And in the quiet, painful aftermath, as you begin to rebuild and heal, stronger and wiser than before, that is her hand upon you. She is not a goddess of stone, confined to a forgotten past. She is a living, breathing force within the human psyche. She is the fire that tests us, the fever that cleanses us, and the fierce, unwavering strength that allows us to heal and be reborn from the ashes. The pharaohs are gone, the empires have turned to dust, and the great temples are ruins, but the roar of the lioness, the eternal, untamable spirit of Sekhmet, has never been louder.